Next speaker is David Donnelly. I've been running into David Donnelly since a time when I had brown hair, many, many years ago, and David was even then fighting all those environmental fights. And he still does to this day, probably busier today than he was then. He's really one of Canada's best-known environmental lawyers, and I think it's fair to say he can often be found in courtrooms or standing before tribunals to do a number of things, to protect green space, to fight for First Nations Aboriginal culture to be preserved, and to prosecute those who break our environmental laws. Not enough of that going on, if you ask me. Here he is to talk about it, David Donnelly.
A kindly old gentleman who has had the misfortune to move into a poorly planned urban sprawl development happens upon his mailbox one morning when he pulls out a flyer, big red letters that says, "Great sex at 82. He thinks to himself, I live at number 74. Dear, I'll be back after a short walk. Well, it's good to be back in Simcoe County. That's a new one, by the way. I speak in Simcoe County quite frequently. That is a new one. It's great to be back in Simcoe County and not dealing with Simcoe County regarding some planning matter at the Ontario Municipal Board. I want to make that distinction right off the bat. I want to thank the Midhurst Ratepayers Association for the invitation today, but also the other great groups in Simcoe County have been fighting for over a decade to protect this beautiful part of Ontario. Simcoe Aware, Food and Water First, the Rescue Lake Simcoe Coalition, Environmental Defense, and of course the supernatural Margaret Atwood. You know, we have a new premier with a strong majority to protect the green belt and to enforce places to grow. For Kathleen Wynne to have grown up in Ontario and to have dreamt that she would one day be premier, a woman and a lesbian, she must have been a Margaret Atwood reader.
Connected those dots.
And now we're counting on her to save Simcoe. Now, I've been asked to speak, I think I've been given the worst job on the panel here today, which I've been asked to speak about process. And if there's anything worse than a hot afternoon sun to put you to sleep, it must be planning process. So I'm going to deal with two things. First is the planning process, or the myths of the planning process as I see in them. Second, I'm going to talk about my 50th birthday, which occurred last week. Let's see if I can pull this off. There's a myth surrounding this secondary plan out there, and it says that if we bring the people these houses in an urban sprawl context below the 35 jobs and residents per hectare mandated by places to grow, that the jobs will come. That hasn't happened since mankind invented fire. It's not the way it works. Young people are looking for job centers with infrastructure and quality of life and public transit. You see anything out of that out there in the middle of that farm field? The world is changing. The expectations of people and immigrants are changing. I learned from my friend, a leader in the advertising industry, just last week that online advertising revenue has surpassed television advertising revenue in terms of gross sales. What does that mean? I don't know, but it means that the world is changing. And for a politician to say that if we stick houses in the middle of a farm field, the jobs will come, that era has long passed. That is a myth. We're being told to trust us by local politicians and even by the province, that this development will pay for itself and that it won't increase the taxes of existing residents. If that was true, the people in Oakville would cash a check from their municipality each year instead of paying for the taxes for municipal taxes as they do. We've seen it. It's been done before south of here, in places like Vaughan and Richmond Hill and Burlington. The system doesn't work. Building new infrastructure to accommodate new growth does not pay for itself. And even if it does pay for itself, the time and the energy that it consumes within the municipality could be better spent elsewhere, on healthcare prevention, on quality of life and the environment, on respect for the elderly and gerontology. We have better things to do than to accommodate developers and new growth, and that's a myth that these things pay for themselves. We've been told that to trust the process. There's an Ontario Municipal Board proceeding ongoing at the moment, and some people would have you say that the public is getting a fair shake and that they're having their say in the process. But when you think that this is a proposal for up to 10,000 houses, that the average home price in Southern Ontario is about $400,000, I did the math, and I'm sure I'm right, but I could be wrong. I think that's $40 billion. When your profit expectation is $40 billion, you can afford to dedicate 10% of that to your approvals. That's $4 billion. The transcript in a mega hearing alone is $100,000. When I look around here today, I see beautiful opponents to this proposal. You people are energized and you're invigorated, and how are you making the money to pay for your experts and your participation? You're selling plant hangers and muffins. This is bake sale justice. This is not democracy. This is not fairness. Don't kid yourself. This process is not working. Finally, it's been printed in the media at least twice that one of the reasons for this township's support for this development is that you can't fight it because there will be resulting lawsuits against the municipality and against the citizens who speak out against it. I was the target of one such strategic lawsuit against public participation, or a slap suit by the same developer at Big Bay Point. You can't say that in a democracy, speaking out against development for your rights and the rights of your children and the environment should be subject to a lawsuit. That is just wrong, and it shouldn't occur in Canada or anywhere else in the world where there's democracy. To say that land use planning is being affected by the threat of a lawsuit, this is not planning, this is intimidation, and it shouldn't occur here. This is the legacy of slap suits in Ontario, and we need legislation to stop it. I turned 50 last week. That's significant to me. First to my wife, who was watching me grow older. When I started my career 25 years ago as an environmentalist, I thought that the primary responsibility of my generation was to save the whales and the great apes. And the theory in those days was that we live in a great apex pyramid, and that if we could protect the charismatic megafauna, including the human species, that we would protect, like an umbrella, all the species underneath us. That's the way we thought. Since that time, I've come to a great reawakening. This is not our priority. This is not even important any longer. The only thing that matters in our life is that we stop the emission of CO2, or we will kill the planet that we know and love. You cannot ignore this reality. The world's nations, including the United States, China, Brazil, India, and even Canada, have agreed that if we exceed 450 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere, we will cause catastrophic climate change. We will lose the species that we know and love, and we will lose our ability to manage our environment and our economy. All the world's nations have agreed. We have passed 400 parts per million. Within the next 28 years, if we don't change our course, we will exceed 450 parts per million of CO2 in the environment. This is a catastrophe that we know is coming. You now know it's coming. I now know it's coming. And yet, what do we do when we wind up in these local municipalities? We talk about ensuring that there are libraries. We talk about ensuring that there's ingress and egress for delivery vans. We talk about ensuring that people have access to strip malls and shopping and drive-through donut stores. But have you ever heard the concept of carbon zoning, where we take a step back and we think about the impact of taking that beautiful green carbon sink that you can see right there and paving it and turning it into something that makes carbon and makes carbon dioxide? There are only two places left on Earth. There are places that are paved, where we drive and we make CO2, and there are places like this, Midhurst, where we protect the environment and we respect the rights of future generations to enjoy a climate somewhat like the climate that we knew. The biggest fault that I have with the Wynne government and this proposal that's proceeding It's not that it lacks some detail, it's not that it lacks the hydrogeology, it's not that it's part of places to grow that it's received a special exemption. Those are all terrible faults, and those are all grounds for turning down this proposal. The problem that I have with this proposal is that it should be the first test for the new Wynne government to impose something unique and extraordinary. As extraordinary as what President Obama just did in regulating the coal industry in the United States. This should be, it must be, it can be the first time that citizens stand up and say, we want carbon zoning. We want to know what is the impact of paving these beautiful carbon sinks, these beautiful farm fields. What is the impact on our atmosphere, on our children and our grandchildren? If we do that, we will set a precedent for the rest of Ontario, the rest of the world, and we will stop this development. That's not something that we want. That's not just something we want. That's not a luxury. That's something we must do. So I have to say, again, on behalf of Environmental Defense and the Innisfil District Association, all wish you well. Please, please, please keep up the fight. Please stop this development. Thank you.